I recently attended a Distant Worlds concert in Los Angeles. These are orchestral concerts featuring arranged music from the Final Fantasy series, and it was okay. Just okay. The set list varies from concert to concert, and this one was heavy on Soken's work from Final Fantasy XIV and XVI, which I'm not a fan of, but we'll get to that in a bit. The arrangements were faithful to the original compositions, and I think that's a point of criticism against the concert. There was a Chocobo medley, which was probably the best performance of the show, if only because it felt like something new, and there was nothing unique or surprising about the rest of the set list. They're almost note-for-note recreations of the original tracks, and because the show's appealing to as broad a group as possible, there were a lot of safe, popular choices, to Xanarkin from Final Fantasy X, Dancing Mad from 6, One Winged Angel from 7. These songs are played out, so I was hoping for some more interesting arrangements, and I didn't get that. That's my fault for going into this concert with the expectation that it'd be something it's not. I didn't do my research. I can't fault the concert for not including anything from Tactics or 12, because it didn't seem like the audience cared. When I saw people showing up in cosplay of characters I'd never seen before, despite completing every mainline game in this series and a fair number of spin-offs, I can only assume they were dressed as their Final Fantasy XIV avatars. Wearing elf ears and shit, I don't know who the hell these characters are, so it makes sense that they'd be cheering for 5 back-to-back songs from 14. Couple these safe arrangements and inconsistent set lists with the, frankly, cheap visuals of gameplay footage displayed on the overhead monitors, and you have a concert that doesn't really do justice to the incredible music this series is known for. You're also at the mercy of whichever orchestra is playing, and they're not always great. The website lists them as the Distant Worlds Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus for most concerts, but I think they're usually local orchestras, and this is just a generic label. The one in London is the Royal Philharmonic Concert Orchestra. In Japan, it's the Kanagawa Philharmonic Orchestra. These Distant World concerts are conceptually flawed. It's like if I invited you to a concert and said I was performing music from various JRPGs. Okay, which ones? Because there's plenty of trash out there. You need to have highly specific taste to get the most out of this concert. For the one I attended, you need to enjoy a random assortment of the mainline games with a preference for Soken's music. You also need to have a high tolerance for the blight upon the earth that is Los Angeles, but let's not get into that. There are several Final Fantasy soundtracks that I really love, and 14 and 16 are not those games. There was nothing from 12, whose soundtrack I hold in high regard, and half the setlist consisted of modern music. 10 songs from Final Fantasies 14 through 16. This was a concert for modern fans, and to placate fans of the PS1 generation, here's one song from Final Fantasy 7, one from 8, and one from 9. Nothing from Tactics. For fans of the older stuff, here's one from 4 and 6. Nothing from 2 or 3. There's no cohesion to this set list. It feels random. I'd rather they play strictly Final Fantasy 14 and 16 music. That way you can go into this concert knowing exactly what you're getting. They wouldn't need to play just the fan favorites from 14 and 16, they'd have room to play some of the less popular tracks, which for fans of these games, they'd love to hear. And in fact, the Eorzean Symphony featured exclusively Final Fantasy XIV music. After the Final Fantasy VII Remake release, there was a tour featuring just Final Fantasy VII Remake music. That is the way to go. I'd be much more interested in a concert that features music exclusively from the PS1 era. A focused event with more interesting arrangements is the kind of concert I want to attend. But just having a concert filled with Final Fantasy VIII music, as much as I love the soundtrack, still doesn't sound that interesting if the arrangements follow too closely to the original tracks. I want something new. I can listen to the in-game tracks at home, make the concert feel special. Unfortunately, I don't think the conductor has much say in how Distant Worlds is run. This feels like a sanitized corporate event. Purchase VIP tickets and attend a meet and greet with special guest Michael Christopher Koji Fox. Who? A translator? The guy who wrote the lyrics to some of the modern songs? Distant Worlds made for a decent night out, but as far as being a memorable experience, it really wasn't. The Final Fantasy X vocalist is showing her age and doesn't have the pipes to sing the music she recorded 20 plus years ago, and I don't fault her for that, at all. But at the same time, I don't really want to attend a modern day Motley Crue concert to hear Vince Neil running out of breath between words, you know what I mean? And the screens displaying footage from the games detracts from the experience. I'm here for the performers, not cheesy gameplay that's not even synchronized to the music. I'd rather the screens show footage of the orchestra members, since I'm sitting too far away to appreciate them. There's really only one way to get quality Final Fantasy music, and that's to go directly to the source, and that's exactly what I did. A brief 11-hour flight later, and I found myself in the land down under, Japan. Finding cheap CDs in Japan is shockingly easy. Most bookstores have a huge selection, and thankfully, most tourists are too busy looking at games and art books to really pay any attention to the gold mine sitting right at their feet. I snagged a copy of my favorite album of all time for just $7. I also grabbed the complete Final Fantasy VII soundtrack for $8. Yeah, I can find lossless quality video game music online in about 2 seconds, but come on, $8? I'll take that deal any day. Right at the heart of Shibuya lies the iconic Tower Records, a 9th-floor building dedicated to music. Unlike the States, Japan still cares about physical CDs, so this place is always packed. The crowds are mostly here for J-pop and to take pictures in front of posters of their favorite boy bands, but I was here for something else: Japanese jazz fusion. The jazz section sits on the 7th floor, and because the escalators were out of commission, you basically have 2 choices to get there. Either wait 5 minutes for a cramped elevator to show up, or hoof it up 7 flights of stairs. Taking the stairs was faster, and that applies for all of Japan really. I checked out the jazz section in probably 24 different stores across Japan, and every single time, there was an old dude close to 95 years old thumbing through the cases, hogging up the aisle. These guys are experts at picking the shelves clean. Before I left, I quickly checked out the video games section. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but there was something that caught my eye: Square Enix Jazz. Now, I'm no stranger to arranged Final Fantasy music. The Black Mages released 3 awesome albums, but I never heard of Square Enix Jazz, so I had to pick them up. And man oh man, are they good. The first album is simply titled Square Enix Jazz with the subtitle Final Fantasy. This released in 2017, and it only contains the music up through 13, nothing from 12, snubbed again. Instead, we get 2 arrangements from 13, and despite not really enjoying that game's combat or story, the music is exceptional. 13 already has some top-class jazzy tracks, so it's no surprise that an arrangement of the battle theme made for a stellar jazz tune. Playing the saxophone on this track is none other than Masato Honda. This man made some amazing contributions to the jazz fusion world, most notably when he joined T-Square in the 90s. Anime fans might recognize his work from the solo to Cowboy Bebop's opening theme, alongside a dozen other anime that I don't know about because I hate anime, but that's neither here nor there. In fact, I'm gonna cut this part out of the script. Honda also worked on, for my money, one of the greatest jazz arrange albums ever produced, Mega Man X. This album is front to back, non-stop, all killer, no filler. And joining him on this album were the bassist and drummer from Cassiopeia, one of the most well-known fusion bands. All of their stuff is fantastic. Man, I'm veering so far off track, I just want to talk about all these awesome jazz albums. So, back to Square Enix Jazz. Both Final Fantasy XIII songs on this album were originally composed by Hamauzu, who behind Uematsu and Sakimoto, I consider to be one of the best composers of the entire Final Fantasy series. He worked alongside Uematsu on the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, and he's responsible for my favorite track from that game, Spira Unplugged. I just wish my favorite track from Final Fantasy XIII was rearranged for this jazz album, Afro Blues. Which was renamed in the American release of the game to Daddy's Got the Blues for some silly reason. What, is Afro considered offensive? Saz has an afro. Anyway, 2 guys were responsible for the arrangements on this jazz album. Eijiro Nakagawa, who plays the trombone, and Ryu Kawamura, a bassist. Both are accomplished musicians, with Nakagawa playing trombone on a handful of tracks in Mario Kart 8. Easily one of the best jazz soundtracks in all of gaming, which comes as no surprise considering the guitar work on that soundtrack was performed by the guitarist for Dimension, one of my favorite fusion bands. Nakagawa's compositions on this first jazz album tend to be the louder of the two. Makes sense considering his instrument of choice. Kawamura composed some softer songs so you can hear his bass more prominently. His music would fit right at home at a jazz club on a rainy night. I consider him to be the superior arranger between the two. Now, the second Square Enix Jazz album doesn't have the Final Fantasy subtitle, it's just called Volume 2. There are songs here that aren't from Final Fantasy, like Nier, Trials of Mana, Romancing Saga 2, and Chrono Trigger, which would get its own dedicated jazz album several years later. Saga got its own dedicated album as well. Of course, there's also a fair selection of Final Fantasy music, including a song from 12. I honestly couldn't even tell which song this was until the 100-second mark, when it finally became obvious. I'm all for unique arrangements that try something new, but the song should still be recognizable. Nakagawa arranged this track, and I don't think it captured the feel of the original very well. It's a fairly repetitive composition, and probably my least favorite song on this album, which hurts considering how seemingly rare it is to get Final Fantasy XII arrangements. I think the approach of tackling a wider variety of games with this album made it a weaker effort than the first. Jazz 1 focused primarily on uematsu compositions, which lent a natural flow between the selection of songs. Jazz 2 feels all over the place. I think the arrangers were given more leeway with their choices, like they could rearrange any music from any Square Enix game, so the selection feels random. But there is some exceptional work here, like the City Ruins arrangement from Nier Automata. There's also a rendition of Dancing Mad on here. But it's just Phase 4. It misunderstands the appeal of the song. When the song was rearranged for the Black Mages, the band members didn't lop off the build-up and go straight for the climax. They gave the song the appropriate room to breathe. And this was before Uematsu officially joined the band, so it's not like only Uematsu knows how to give this song its proper justice. The Phase 4 portion works in the context of the full song because it's built up over the course of the preceding 12 minutes. That's what makes the song so memorable. That's what gives the climax its punch. Really quick, since we're on the subject of the Black Mages, the guitarist for that group was Tsuyoshi Sekito. Who is this man? None other than the composer for The Last Remnant, a balls-to-the-wall, kick-ass album that doesn't get anywhere near enough praise. Probably the single greatest video game soundtrack ever conceived. God damn, I love this album. Before we move on to the last Final Fantasy related album, I want to briefly cover the Chrono Trigger jazz arrangements. Now this is what I'm talking about. When you narrow your focus, you get a more consistent album. By featuring exclusively Chrono Trigger music, Nakagawa and Kawamura were able to piece together a stronger album than any of the generically titled Square Enix Jazz CDs. And while there are ranges of iconic tracks like Frog's Theme and Robo's Theme, if there's one song from Chrono Trigger I'd expect on a jazz arrange, it's Dome 16's Ruin, and it's a notable absence here. But when it comes to Chrono Trigger, you could pick any song and it'd fit in perfectly on a jazz CD. The original composer, Yasunori Mitsuda, ran a jazzy undercurrent through each song, so it's no surprise that every song on this jazz arrange sounds great. Nakagawa even said as much on the liner notes. Something that stood out to me at first was how compatible his melodies are for jazz arrangements. If I had to recommend one Square Enix Jazz CD, it would be Chrono Trigger, but there's one other album that edges it out, something that's really, really special. Here it is, the creme de la creme of the lot, Final Fantasy VII Jazz. A perfect selection of recognizable tracks and arrangements that infuse a wonderful jazz flavor without obscuring the original compositions. I love the distorted guitar tone on this track. That's not something you typically hear in jazz. Jazz guitarists prefer using a clean tone, so it's refreshing to hear something different, yet fit in so well. It sells that sleazy feel a Shinra theme should have. This arrangement of Aerith's theme almost matches the original in terms of quality. It just feels like this song was always meant to have a sax playing the lead. I think most people view this as a somber song considering the scene it plays, but it's not. It's an uplifting one. It's called Aerith's theme, not Aerith's death theme. The song reflects her personality, and this arrangement does a great job portraying the highs and lows of her character. I don't think there's a weak track on this album, and there's a nice mix of up-tempo and calming songs. But my favorite, by a light year, is the arrangement of Cosmo Canyon. It's my favorite song out of all of these Square Enix Jazz Arrange albums. That's Naoto Suzuki on guitar. You don't know who he is? You never heard of him? Me neither. He performed for a shitload of anime that I'll never watch. No offense to anime fans, but it's not my bag. Look, what I do know is that this section where he duels with the saxophone is perfect. It also helps that the Cosmo Canyon theme is one of the most memorable tracks in a soundtrack packed with timeless music. I really wish these guys did more game-specific albums for this series. Make a 20-track album of Final Fantasy X jazz arrangements, and I'll snap that shit up in a heartbeat. I should note that several musicians that worked on this album also performed on the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth soundtracks. But good luck sorting through that mess of credits to figure out who played on which track. There are over 100 musicians that worked on over 200 songs, so it's a small miracle that this soundtrack even came together. Sure, these jazz arrange albums are great, but game soundtracks themselves are also filled with tons of awesome music. For jazz fusion specifically, you can't go wrong with the Gran Turismo series. This song is composed by Masahiro Ando, the founder and guitarist of T-Square, and if you haven't heard of T-Square, man, are you in for a treat. Check out the Adventures album and listen for any familiar sounding songs. For more traditional jazz, Grim Fandango is still the reigning king in the world of game music. Before I leave, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the classic F-Zero Jazz album, another all-killer, no-filler masterpiece. I still listen to this album religiously. And just in case you think there couldn't possibly be any more video game jazz albums, you'd be wrong. There's even one for Ace Attorney. I'll cut myself short before I start suggesting another 30 albums and create more work for myself trying to splice all of this together in one video, but there's a world flush with top-shelf video game music, both official tunes and arrange albums. I love the rock and fusion stuff. There's also an F-Zero X rock album that's better than the in-game stuff, and the in-game stuff is already great. Hopefully this serves as a taste of what's out there and encourages you to find some arranges of music of your favorite games. Not enough people appreciate this music, so it's my pleasure to share some of my favorites. Modern radio music is utter trash. All of it. So it's nice that there are still people out there sharing their love for music. I hope they stick around for many years to come.